National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This podcast is brought to you through the generous support of the Albert and Ethel Hertzstein Charitable Foundation. This is our mini episode where I will hone in on some of the finer points from last week's main episode. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and today I'll be continuing our discussion on the 2006 film, Flags of Our Fathers. Flags of Our Fathers focuses on the battle for Iwo Jima and the story of the Marines and one Navy corpsman who raised an American flag on the top of Mount Suribachi 5 days into the 36-day battle for the small island of Iwo Jima. The moment the flag was raised, Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal snapped an image of it, and that picture became one of the most iconic images in human history. The movie focuses on the struggles and issues dealt with by the surviving flag raisers as they are more or less forced to go on a bond tour at the end of the war. Flags of Our Fathers stars Ryan Philippe as John Bradley, Jesse Bradford as Rennie Gagnon, Adam Beach as Ira Hayes, and many more. The film was directed by Clint Eastwood, produced by Eastwood, Robert Lorenz, and Steven Spielberg. It was written by William Broyles and Paul Haggis, based on the book of the same name written by James Bradley. The film was both a financial and critical success.
Schreier took his patrol up the mountain. They got to the top. There were no Japanese intercepting. There were no Japanese on the top. So they they found some water pipe, from a damaged cistern system that they had set up to collect rainwater. Had about a 20-foot piece of pipe, and they hooked a small flag to that, and 6 of the men raised it at about 10:20 in the morning. Just about the time, there's several stories, but I'll say the best story is that General Holland Mad Smith, we call him Holland Mad Smith, Holland M. Smith, and the Secretary of the Navy landed on the beach. And the Secretary of the Navy, in addition to saying that flag up there means the Marine Corps for 500 years, said, General, I'd like to have that flag as a memento of my visit to Iwo Jima. And so my battalion commander got that word, and after he hung up the phone, he was heard to say words to the effect that, hell no, they can't have our flag, we put it up there and we're going to keep it. So he called a lieutenant who was an assistant operations officer, Ted Tuttle, and sent Ted down to the beach to find another flag. And Ted told me in later years that as he left the command post, Colonel Johnson yelled at him and said, see if you can get a bigger flag.
That was the voice of Colonel Dave Severance. If you listened to the main episode, you heard me refer to Colonel Dave as being a technical, rather historical consultant to the film Flags of Our Fathers. You'll hear more from Dave in just a few. The second flag raising on Mount Suribachi is one of the most iconic moments in the history of World War II. Not because it did anything special at that moment, but because of the excitement and patriotism it generated, or at least the picture generated. To the Marines who raised the flag, it was nothing at all. Just another thing to do and another day on that hellhole called Iwo Jima. The flag raisings, of which there were 2, would never have been possible had Suribachi not been captured by the Marines in the first place. Suribachi was a honeycomb of defenses. More than 70 pillboxes were at or near its base, with another 60 or so scattered along its rise, all connected by tunnels and caves manned by some 2,000 fanatical Japanese. Marines of the 5th Division cut the island in 2 on D-Day, with my good buddy Jim Goodrich being one of those who were lucky enough to survive that trek. In order to go up the extinct volcano, the Marines had to surround it, which took them 4 days to do. At dawn on the 4th day, Colonel Chandler Johnson sent orders to a young Lieutenant Harold Schreier to report to him. Schreier had taken command of Easy Company 28th Marines 3rd Platoon the day before, that morning. He'd taken over for the wounded Lieutenant John K. Wells, who was the original platoon leader, who'd been wounded in an artillery barrage the night before. As such, Schreier had been instructed by Dave Severance to lead a patrol to the top of Suribachi, but before he left, he was ordered to go see Colonel Johnson, as I said. Colonel Johnson told Schreier that if he got to the top of Suribachi, big if he got to the top of Suribachi, that he should place a flag on the crest. With those orders, Schreier gathered his men and set off on his patrol. Now, an earlier patrol had made its way to the crest of Suribachi about an hour before Schreier did. Expecting fierce resistance, the Marines braced for an attack that never came, or at least to that point. From the base, Schreier looked up and was a bit dismayed at what he saw. The former Marine raider wasn't afraid of what he might meet on the way up. He was more irritated at the fact that the climb would be slow and steep and would therefore make he and his men easy targets. Nevertheless, Schreier and his men made their way up the mountain slowly, very slowly. His column snaked its way up the volcano, stopping every few minutes for breath, posting flankers for protection as they did so. Finally, some 30 minutes after he started, Schreier made his way to the top. He climbed up over the lip of the edge and looked into the volcano's pit. Empty machine gun nests, mortar positions, and other equipment from the Japanese lay scattered everywhere. But to his astonishment, no Japanese were to be seen anywhere. Third man up to the top from Schreier's patrol was a man named Harold Keller from Brooklyn, Iowa. Like Schreier, Keller was also a former raider and no stranger to combat. He surveyed the territory and, like everyone else, was a bit unnerved by the lack of Japanese defenders. Expecting some mass banzai charge, Keller and his comrades braced for the inevitable. Keller scanned the inner rim of the volcano, and as he did, he saw one Japanese stick his head out of a cave. Whirling on his heels, he fired a short burst from his BAR. Keller's burst started a torrent of Japanese grenades and rifle shots at the Marines, who answered in kind. The much-expected and anticipated firefight ended as quickly as it began, though, with no casualties on the Marine side and Japanese casualties unknown. After the firing subsided, several Marines found a water pipe from a Japanese cistern and attached the flag to it. At precisely 10:31 hours, the American flag was raised for the first time on Mount Suribachi. The flag was raised by Harold Schreier, Sergeant Ernest I. Thomas, Jr., Sergeant Henry Hansen, Corporal Charles Lindbergh, and Private Philip Ward. After the flag was up, pharmacist mate John Bradley helped stabilize the pole while the other Marines firmly planted it in Suribachi's rocky soil. As soon as the flag went up, sirens, ship's horns, and cheers were heard from the base of Suribachi to the ships at sea. Such had been the fight for the island at that point that the sight of Old Glory atop the island's highest point brought a great swell of pride from everyone who could see her waving in the wind. Much like earlier, the Japanese, enraged at the sight of the flag, burst from caves inside and on Suribachi and opened fire. The Marines responded, and again, like the first firefight, the second one ended with a whimper. Now, the story of the second flag raising on Suribachi is famous, and I won't bother to reiterate it here, but what I will do is let you listen to someone who was there. Down below at the base of Suribachi stood Dave Severance. He watched as the men from his company, Easy Company, made their way up the volcano and planted the flag. Let's let Dave pick up the story of how the second flag came into being.
Sergeant Strank, one of my squad leaders, and 4 of his men were reeling this wire up, so the colonel sent the large flag up with them with instructions to tell Lieutenant Schreier, take down the small flag, put this flag up, send the small flag down to me. At the same time, Joe Rosenthal, the Associated Press photographer, was making his way ashore, heard from the coxswain's radio that the Marines had sent a patrol up the mountain, and according to Joe, they mentioned that they had a flag. There he ran into 2 photographers, Bill Gnaust, who had a movie camera, and Bob Camel, who was a PFC, who had a still photograph, or a still camera. Rosenthal said he talked them into going up the mountain with him, and as they started up the mountain, they ran into Lou Lowry, who had been a photographer with the 1st Patrol. Lou told him he had taken a picture of the flag already, but he thought it would be a good idea if they went on up because there's a beautiful sight from the top of the mountain. So the 3 photographers talked among themselves and decided they'd continue on up the mountain. And when they got up there, they saw a group with another piece of pipe putting the large flag on it. Asked somebody what they're doing. They said, well, we're putting this flag up because we want to save the other one as a souvenir. Schreier arranged it so that the new flag, the large flag, went up about 12 feet from where the other flag was, just as the other flag came down. And there is a photograph of that exchange of flags that was taken. Gnaust was standing next to Rosenthal. Just as they were started to raise the second flag, Gnaust was photographing it, asked Rosenthal if he was in his way, and Joe Rosenthal said he turned his head towards him, answered no, and out of the corner of his eye saw the flag start up. So he swung around, sighted as with his camera, snapped one shot. Didn't know whether he got a picture or not.
Now, for years, the Marine Corps insisted that it knew the men who raised the second flag. Those men were Michael Strank, Franklin Sousley, Harlan Block, Ira Hayes, Rennie Gagnon, and John Bradley. As soon as the image got its just popularity, the 6 men who had been or were in the process of being identified were located. Unfortunately, Block, Sousley, and Strank had been killed in the days after the flag raising, a testimonial to the ferocity of the fighting on Iwo. But Bradley, Hayes, and Gagnon were alive and were sent home for a bond tour that was just kicking off, the subject of our movie, really. Let's pick up again with Dave as he talks about how the presumed flag raisers from his company were located and sent home.
About, I'm guessing at dates here, say the 22nd of March. We got word that the president wanted survivors of the flag raising Rosenthal's picture sent back to the States to participate in the 7th War Bond Drive, which was going out in April. Bradley had already been wounded and left. Ira Hayes, they didn't know at that time that he was in the picture. Actually, they thought there were 5 people in the picture when the president sent word to send them back. So only then did we start checking around to see who the hell was in the picture. And we came up that time with, we thought Hansen was there, and it turned out later to be Block. Hansen had been killed. So Gagnon was the only one on the island at the time, and we put him aboard ship when we left, and we stopped in Eniwetok and put him on a plane in Eniwetok for Washington, D.C. We got back to Hawaii about 2 days after the president died, which I think was about the 14th of April. And we had orders waiting for Ira Hayes to be flown to Washington. Because Gagnon had finally, well, they determined by blowing the photo up that there were 6 people in it. And Gagnon told him that Ira Hayes was the 6th person, so he had orders to send him out.
Did he want to go?
No. He didn't want any part of it. Well, he was a quiet type, almost bashful, I would say. And he didn't want the publicity. But we said the commandant's ordered you, you've got to go. Lieutenant Stoddard, one of my lieutenants, had come back from being wounded, and he had quite a long talk with Hayes and convinced him it was his duty to go back.
Now, as history has recently told us, Rennie Gagnon and John Bradley did not raise that second flag on top of Mount Suribachi, and I won't get into that whole thing here because we already did on the main episode. But what I will get into briefly is the story of the men who actually did raise the second flag. On June 26, 2016, the United States Marine Corps formally admitted that it had misidentified a member of the flag-raising team. The Corps announced that Marine Corporal, then Private First Class, Harold Schultz was one of the flag raisers, and Navy Corpsman John Bradley was not one of the flag raisers in Rosenthal's second flag-raising photograph. Harold Schultz was identified as being in Franklin Sousley's position to the right and in front of Ira Hayes. And Sousley was identified as being in Bradley's position, or what was thought to be Bradley's position, to the right and behind Rennie Gagnon, behind Harlan Block at the base of the flagpole. Bradley and Schultz had been present when both flags were actually raised, while Sousley was only on Mount Suribachi when he helped raise the second flag. Schultz, not one for the limelight, never admitted that he raised the flag. Yet he surely was aware of the attention and possibly severe criticism his announcement may and probably would have garnered in his lifetime. After the war, he moved to California where he worked for the post office. He passed away in 1995, and only near the end of his life did he ever mention, in passing, to his stepdaughter that he had raised a second flag on top of Mount Suribachi. It took the Corps another 11 years to admit that it was the nondescript postal worker who helped raise the flag. That brings us back to the Marine I spoke about earlier, Harold Keller. On October 16, 2019, the Marine Corps announced that Harold Keller was the flag raiser previously identified as Rennie Gagnon in Rosenthal's photograph. Photos and video footage showed that the man, originally identified as Gagnon, had a wedding ring which matched Keller, who had married in 1944. A bit more is known about Harold Keller than Harold Schultz. Keller was a former Raider in the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, as I said earlier. He'd been on Midway Island with the Raiders in June of 42 and made the almost disastrous raid on Macon Island in 1942, and also been on Guadalcanal with Carlson's Raiders and taken part in the Long Patrol. On Bougainville, he was shot in the shoulder by a Japanese while in action and sent home to recover. While home, he married Ruby O'Halloran, who worked at the paper that Harold used to deliver before the war. Following his wedding, like so many other veterans of the Raiders and Paramarines and other Marine combat veterans, Keller was assigned as cadre to the new 5th Marine Division, where he would land on Iwo Jima on D-Day. Keller earned accolades for his bravery, saving a fellow platoon member's life on D-Day running into a field of fire to retrieve his wounded comrade. He would survive the battle, of course, and come home to father 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. An article from USA Today says that after the war, quote, Keller went back to work for the phone company for a while and then took a job at a local creamery. When the creamery closed, he worked at an electrical equipment firm. He served as head of Brooklyn High School's athletic boosters, chief of the city's volunteer firefighters, and was a beloved fellow about town. When the family built a new house, people from all over would stop by to help out, according to a 1950 Tribune story. Harold Keller died of a heart attack in 1979. He was 57, unquote. In a rare instance, he is quoted from his local paper describing the war, and he says, quote, "You don't think about it when you're in it. If you did, you'd probably be put in a straitjacket before long. Some of your experiences are so fantastic that people wouldn't believe them anyway. Usually it sounds like a lot of baloney, although it's true," unquote. Like all real combat veterans, Harold didn't want the limelight. He just wanted to move on and live his life the best he could. In the end, does it matter who raised the flag? To history, yes it does. But to the Marines, no it really doesn't. That image and the pride it brings is representative of the Corps, and that is how it should be viewed. Semper Fidelis. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to tune in next week when we finally discuss the 1953 classic Stalag 17. Until then, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on Stitcher and iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer Mallory Kirk, and our sound engineer Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.